H-I-J.
Learning the alphabet in your front garden on a sunny day. Homeschooling can be fun sometimes, certainly for 5-year-old Emily. But it's a very different story for her older brother Thomas.
Well done.
He has learning difficulties, but it's the lack of resources that's hindered his education during lockdown. His parents say they can't afford a laptop, so online lessons have been a non-starter. Those who want children back at school next month say it'll benefit those most in need, like Thomas.
I think he's going to suffer more because he's behind anyway, so he's missed that 2 months of education because obviously I haven't been able to do it with him properly like I would have done if I'd been able to get the links and access the work.
You've been out of school now for 2 months. What subject do you miss the most?
Options.
What's options?
Swimming, movies and shopping.
Have you been able to do anything like that while you've been in lockdown?
Nope.
And how have you felt about that?
Boring and sad.
If Thomas gets a chance to go back to school on the 1st of June, will you allow him to?
No, because they've already said that they cannot social distance, and I think in order to keep him safe, that's what they need to do. Even though he needs his education, his health and safety comes first.
Another town, Cheadle, another family, Ant and Louise Lewis and their 7 children. They've been trying to do online lessons with them using 2 phones. Why do you not have a laptop?
We can't afford one.
Some people might find that hard to believe. What would you say to them?
Well, spend £200 a week on food to start with, before a mortgage and bills. I'm self-employed, so we don't get a great deal of benefits.
Are you still able to work?
Not at the moment, no. Been 3 months.
Their son found it so hard to work at home, Louise and Ant let him go back to school.
They're doing hand washing, they've got antibacterial gel as they go in and come out.
Will you feel as confident about that in terms of your other children going back to school, possibly at least one of them on June the 1st?
Probably not with the older one, because there'll be a lot more in the school at the time.
This classroom normally would have tables for 30 children in. Obviously all the furniture would be facing the right ways, and they'd have books, soft toys. Before the children come back, there's actually going to be a perspex screen.
Brian Wilkinson is expecting some of his parents to keep their children at home. Unlike many other local authorities, Tory-run Staffordshire County Council wants schools like his to reopen on June the 1st for children in reception, Year 1 and Year 6. Do you think it'll be safe?
We can reduce risk, and we can always put things in place that will reduce that risk, but we can never guarantee that the environment is going to be 100% safe. There's a reason why childhood diseases spread so quickly in schools, and that's because they're full of children.
If you had had a choice, would you have chosen the 1st of June for children to come back?
I think if it is a return, I think then it needed, from my perspective, I would have liked to have done it a little bit slower, and I think maybe the choice of year groups isn't ideal when you're trying to put social distancing in place.
The government's new flexibility expressed today on when children go back to school is echoed by the leader of Staffordshire County Council. Will you back schools that don't open in Staffordshire?
I think if the schools themselves have got doubts about how they can open, I'm absolutely certain that they'll work with their neighbouring schools in making sure that there's a place of education, because they are a community. All of the schools in a place like Staffordshire, believe it or not, they work together.
You going on all right, matey?
It's likely to be September before Thomas is back at school, but for him at least, homeschooling will be a little easier. He's now got a laptop, thanks to the charity Action for Children.
Well, joining me now is Devi Sridhar, who's Professor of Global Public Health at Edinburgh University. Does Boris Johnson's announcement that track and trace will be up and running by the beginning of June mean it is safe to open the schools the same week?
Well, I think the question is really, is it safe enough? And it really depends what part of the country you're looking at. Public Health England released figures of what they saw as confirmed cases in different parts of the country. And some of them, like Kent and Cumbria, you're having on average over 5,000 daily new cases. In other places, you're having them in the few dozens. And so I think it really depends what part of the country you're in, and giving that information to schools to make the call if they think it's safe enough to open.
Boris Johnson called this new track and trace system world-beating today. Is there anything world-beating about it that you can see?
Well, I think what he will find out soon is that it's one thing to have the idea to do this, which South Korea and other countries have been doing since January and February. It's another one to actually have to implement it. It's an operational issue. So it's one thing to have the number of tests, as we've seen, and to set goals and targets. It's another one to deliver on them and actually implement a very complex system logistically across an entire country.
We saw yesterday in the briefing the beginning of the scientists saying, well, our advice is to have a system that works. It's up to the politicians to deliver a system that works. Are we seeing the beginning of the splits?
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see how scientists and politicians go forward and also look back at the mistakes that have been made over the past 12 weeks. And I think the thing that comes out clearly is the need for transparency, that if SAGE had published its minutes, if the membership had been published from the start, if the advice had been clear to the public and to the media, it'd be much easier to go back and actually trace, and throughout time for other scientists as well to hold the advice to peer review standards, to actually avoid this kind of situation where everyone's pointing the finger for decisions at other parties.
I mean, we also saw Therese Coffey, the cabinet minister, sort of talking about, well, if the scientific advice was wrong, then it's no wonder people think our actions were wrong.
Yeah, I think that's also misunderstanding slightly what scientists can do. Science cannot answer very easily yes or no questions for policy areas such as should we open schools. What we can do as scientists is say, this is the state of the knowledge. This is what we're reasonably certain we know. This is what we don't know. These are the trade-offs and the costs and benefits of different policy options. And then it's up to ministers and politicians to decide which decision they want to take and which choice they take forward.
I mean, it does seem, though, from Parliament's actions today, voting to go back to work and sort of home working for themselves, if you like, from the beginning of June, that things are sort of getting back to normal a bit quicker, and we will be left with this system of shielding the most vulnerable. Can we now say that shielding is working or does work?
Well, I think there's three crucial questions around shielding. The first is it effective? What we've seen is that if daily cases are quite high, it doesn't work effectively. Sweden and Netherlands, as well as care homes in the UK, have shown this. It's very hard to separate the vulnerable from the healthy. The second question, is it acceptable? Do people want to be shielded? I think there are quite a lot of healthy 70-year-olds who probably don't necessarily want to be staying at home, that think they want to be part of society. So you can inform people, but they have to make a choice. And the third one is it ethical? Do we want a society where the healthy and young are circulating and where the elderly and those who are frail are kept at home? And I think that's a really tough and moral decision to make.
You are an advisor to the Scottish Government. Does it seem to you that Scotland is now on a different path to England? Or is everybody now effectively doing the same thing?
Well, I would say, actually, I think England is on a different path to the other three nations because Scotland is aligned with Wales and Northern Ireland and staying in lockdown longer. And the reason is you have to find a way to suppress this outbreak. That means keeping daily new cases low. Lockdown works incredibly effectively, but the problem is it's very costly, as we're saying. You can't stay in lockdown forever until there's a solution. So you have to replace lockdown with a package of interventions. So when is the point when lockdown can end and test, trace, isolate can take over and cause the same suppression? And so I think that the gamble, you could say, in England is that they're able to do this by easing lockdown a little bit early. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are being a bit more cautious, saying we really want to drive down numbers low enough that we're confident that testing and tracing can actually serve this role and we don't need to go into another lockdown again.
Devi Sridhar, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, Denmark has been hailed as a role model for the successful reopening of schools. They were the first country in Europe to reopen primary schools after containing the virus early on, and pupils up to the age of 11 have been back for a month. So are there key lessons to learn from what they've done? Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman is in the capital, Copenhagen. Jonathan, how are things working there?
Well, to be honest with you, Jackie, I feel as if I've landed on a completely different planet. I haven't seen a face mask in Copenhagen all day. The bars and the restaurants around me are open and busy. There is some social distancing going on, but not that much. The secondary schools opened this week. The primary schools, as you said, opened a month ago. The primary school I visited this morning, most of the teaching was taking place outdoors in fine weather, with the children divided into small groups, which of course requires a lot of teachers. The rules about social distancing have been relaxed, so the children are no longer 2 metres apart, but 1 metre apart, in theory, if that, and the children are no longer washing their hands every 90 minutes, but maybe 3 times a day. So as the infection rate has remained low, the rules have become more and more relaxed. I wasn't sure how much learning was really going on. It seemed to me that both the teachers and the children were actually having rather a good time in a more relaxed atmosphere, not following the strictures of the curriculum so much. And this afternoon I asked the Danish Foreign Minister what advice he would give British teachers who might be nervous about going back to work.
Well, I would say to them that it's very important that the health authority come with clear guidelines on how many kids should be in the class and the distance between the kids. And now it's summertime, which means that we can be more outdoor, and that is very good because you're less exposed outdoor. Things like that. And at the end of the day, if everybody behaves with social responsibility and with distance, I think it works. We can see that in schools and also in kindergartens.
Now, as one virologist said to me today, perhaps the situation here in Denmark is too perfect, in the sense that, according to one study, the infection rate of the population is only about 1%, which could make them vulnerable to a second wave of disease. There's also the question of what happens when the autumn comes, the weather changes, and you can no longer teach children outside. And the reply the Danes have given me is this: we will take it gradually, we will take it as it comes, we will see how it goes, and if we make mistakes, if the infection rate goes up, we will change tack.